So I guess there's a curiosity about this slightly wrinkled, slightly crumpled, slightly balding, slightly overweight guy with that voice that Dana Carvey mocked regularly on Saturday Night Live. And I know what you're saying silently to yourself. How the hell did this become a TV personality winding up in Sophia Loren's bedroom and under the tent on safari with Brooke Shields? Let me tell you, it was all very enjoyable, but it wasn't easy, and it was a rather long journey. There was never an ad in the New York Times that described my job. And everything I've ever done in life, I've had to create it all out of thin air. Thank you. Now, my hero back in a long, long time ago was a man called Sir Winston Churchill. Yes, I'm that old. And he once said, listen to this, a good speech should be like a woman's skirt, long enough to cover the subject, but short enough to create interest. For you. Yep, everybody from Fergie to Ludacris sort of ripped me off over the years. Now, I followed the 3 Ds of life to bring me here tonight to the Inspire Theatre throughout my career, and for Andy, who promised me several girls with short skirts. Now, those 3 Ds are dedication, determination, and discipline. And I want you to leave tonight with a very easy to remember message. Are you watching? Good. Remember this. A 1,000-mile journey in life begins with a single step. Now, Abe Lefkowitz said that to his wife, Ruthie, back in 1976. She hasn't seen him since. In the long ago dark ages, way before there was cable television and the internet, news came delivered through the miracle of a newspaper that was pushed through the front door letterbox. But to me, it was like Mac King. It was magic. I no longer had to wait to go to the cinema on a Saturday to see the Pathé newsreel for the week. It was right there the next morning. And I knew then at 10 years of age that I wanted to be in the newspaper business. Every week at my high school, I would send a story about what happened in the week to the local newspaper, and not once in the 5 years that I did it was it ever acknowledged, except that they ran it, and they always put my little initials RL at the bottom of it, but they never answered one question I had. It was a cruel business. But when I went there on the day that I graduated school, I asked for the editor, and before I said anything, he said to me, "We've been waiting for you." And that's one of the 3 Ds, discipline and determination and diligence. The first day was the ultimate in cruelty. I was still in short pants. I was 15 and a half years of age, and I was introduced in the newsroom as the new cub reporter. And there was a map of every street in the town of Harrow, which is where I come from, on the wall. And the editor came out and he introduced me to everybody else on the staff. And he said to me that we have a feature here on page 3 every week. It's called On the Street Where You Live. And he took a dart and he threw it into the map. And he told me, "You go there, don't bother coming back to the office if you don't come back with a story." It was pissing with rain, and I was on a bicycle. And I rode to this street, and it was coming down like Noah's Ark had started all over again. And I figured that the person who was probably the most interesting would be on the top floor of the block of flats, the apartment building. So I went up, knocked on the door. Man answered the door. Very unusual back in the 1950s for a man to be home in the afternoon in Britain. And I asked him, I introduced myself, said, I'm Robin Leach from the Harrow Observer. May I ask why you're at home? You shouldn't be at home, you should be out working. And he explained that he was working from home and that he was a songwriter and he was writing a musical. And I had not a clue what a songwriter was at that point or what a musician was or anything. And I asked him what he was doing, and he told me that he was writing a musical for a man called Anthony Newley called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. Oh. Coincidences? I think so, Myron. And I asked him if I could come in and talk to him and write a story about what he was doing. And he said yes, and then he called out to his wife to put the kettle on for tea. Everybody in England puts the kettle on for tea. And his wife came out, and I did a double take because her name was Evie Romaine, and she was the biggest, not only in terms of chest size, but also the biggest horror movie actress that Britain had ever filmed for all of the Hammer pictures. And the story came out, it was perfect. And I was invited to go into the West End and meet Anthony Newley on the night that he debuted Stop the World. And I remember going backstage with Leslie Brickus, and Joan Collins was in our little group because she was married to Anthony at the time. And Anthony Newley was banging his head against the brick wall in his dressing room, saying that he'd failed to deliver his best performance for the author, Leslie Brickus. And I said, gee, these are really interesting people. I want to know a lot more about it. Know a lot more about these people and write about them. And that was my introduction to show business on my very first assignment as a young kid. And I never forget it, and I'm still friends to this day, all those years later, with Leslie and Joan and Evie and the gang. That was 15. At 18, I graduated to the Daily Mail. I became the youngest ever front page headline reporter. And that editor was just as cruel as the first editor. There were two of us that sat in the newsroom on a Monday afternoon, and he sent us both off on stories and said, one of you will never come back here. So all I can tell you is I never saw the other guy again. But at 20 odd years of age, I was on the news desk, and a man called Brian Epstein, who was a furniture store manager in Liverpool, called and said that he wanted me to come to Hamburg and see a group called the Goldbugs. And the next morning I put the story idea up to the editor, and they told me that they weren't interested in rock and roll music. So I had to call Brian Epstein back and tell him, you have to call my friend Derek Taylor at the Daily Express, and maybe he'll come. Derek Taylor went on to not only go to Hamburg, but he became the president of Apple Records. Me, I flipped a coin. And the coin was either heads for Australia or tails for the America. And you know how that toss turned out. I came here, and back in those days in 1963 when I arrived, green cards for journalists from Britain were easy to obtain, and I got a job on the Daily News in New York, where my third editor was the cruelest of the previous editors, who simply just fired me for working too hard. Those were in the days when the Guild in New York determined how long you worked on a story, which was, to me, totally stupid. But having been fired, I was told that I should start doing everything for myself. And so I went on to join Rupert Murdoch when we were launching a little newspaper called The Star, if anybody remembers that. And The Star begat what now is known as the whole Fox television, Fox films, and everything else. While we were there at the Star, they wanted to do a television show about the stories that we had each week. And I got invited to go to the Oscars to cover the awards ceremony. One of the beautiful things about the awards ceremony at the Oscars is that Every artist, every actor, actress cannot get away from that press room. They are trapped in there. And so for once in your life, you don't have them running away from you. You can talk to them, you can ask them any question you want, you have them for as long as you wish. And who walks in but Warren Beatty? Now, if ever a journalist wants a great story, you would want Warren Beatty to spill the beans on his love life. And I nailed him that night. And the only other people in the room were ABC, CBS, and NBC. The only person who asked Warren Beatty with questions was me. So the next morning on all the networks, there's Warren Beatty talking with this young kid called Robin Leach about his love life. Somehow the phone rings, and a man called Reese Schoenfeld, who was starting cable news network for Ted Turner, called me and said, I want you on a show on CNN. And so I landed up on a show called People Tonight, and I learned everything about television there without money, without anything. In fact, we were recording under blankets in a moving truck. And from that show, I got a call from another friend of mine called Jack Haley, who asked me to do the pilot for Entertainment Tonight. And I wound up as the global roving editor for Entertainment Tonight. And one of the first stories that we did for week 1 of that show in 1980 was an exclusive with Lana Turner in Deauville. And Lana became a very good friend and agreed eventually to do the first show for Lifestyles. Why did we think of Lifestyles? This is an extraordinary story. I'm sent to interview Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett at their house in Malibu. And when I went there, I wanted, of course, to see the two of them having huggy breakfast together and in the bedroom together. And the producer of Entertainment Tonight at that time only wanted to get questions answered about Ryan O'Neal's propensity for boxing and hitting people. Not exactly the best of circumstances to ask that question, and I refused to ask the question, and once again got into an altercation with them about how hard you work on stories, etc., etc. There was a man who had started Entertainment Tonight by the name of Al Massini, and so I went to him and I said this was completely wrong, that the direction of entertainment was going in, and I said, I have an idea for a show called Lifestyles, and he said, do you think you can get rich people to do all the things that you get famous people to do? And I said yes, and we had lunch. I gave him a 1.5-page sheet of paper with the whole layout of the show, and he said to me, how much is this going to cost me? And I said $8 million to get it started. And he stood up, paid the check for lunch, and said, you've got the $8 million, and we were partners on a handshake for 14 years, producing one of the longest running great guy, producing one of the longest running shows in television. And I had a budget of $165,000 a week to churn out 26 episodes a year, plus 4 2-hour specials. We were the first reality show. And so tonight, I'm going to apologize that reality television has led to Kim Kardashian coming into the world and showing the insides of her thighs. I'm really sorry that we brought reality television in. If you like Kim Kardashian's thighs, you're probably very thankful to me. You know, we had a very simple theory with Lifestyles of Rich and Famous. There was nothing wrong in being rich. It is the reward of hard work. It is a way for people who are very wealthy to keep scores, like playing table tennis. And everyone in this room has never asked to have their salary cut in half. They've always asked for a raise. So we knew that people wanted to be rich, wanted to be successful. And the biggest challenge was how we found those people to tell those stories. If you go home and look in the yellow pages, there are no listings for rich people or famous people. Where did we find them? We actually got every one of our stories from them. They told us about other people who were rich and successful and famous. It was the same way we found our houses to tour. We went from houses in Las Jardas, Mexico. We were told when we left there that we should go to a house in Australia that was so large. The guy had roads inside the house where he had chauffeur-driven Rolls Royces to take you from the guest quarters down to the living room and the dining room. And when I said to that man, Manny Margolin, I don't think I'll ever see another house as big as this, he said, you haven't been to the all-gold house in Hong Kong? And I said, no. And so we went to the all-gold house in Hong Kong. And when I left that house, I said to the owners, I don't think I'm ever going to see a house like this. And I will admit that on the way out, I did take my nail file and shave a few flakes off the front door. And that guy said to me, you haven't been to the house in Switzerland with the 365 rooms, one for every day of the year? And I said, no. And so we went to Switzerland and we filmed that. And over the years, we made 500 hours of television shows because Lifestyles begat such shows as Star Search, Runaway, Fame, Fortune, and Romance, the start of something big. And then the only show that we crapped out on was the first time that television critics loved what we did. I knew the minute that they talked about Preview and said this was brilliant television, we were out of business. And sure enough, after 6 weeks, we lost $35 million on that show, and it ended. All the other shows, they panned and were hugely successful, so we could bite that bullet. But you know, after 14 years of doing a show creatively, you do get worn out. You cannot keep doing it. And it was just about that time that I was thinking about we should wrap this thing up and go out on a high note, that my old friend Reese Schoenfeld from CNN, coincidences, resurfaced and came to me with an idea that, funny line, better than sliced bread. He walks into my office and he said, what is the highest rated television show of all time, ever? You won't believe this, but on Christmas Eve, on every television station around the world is the Yuletide log. Just plays music and the flames burn around the log. That's the highest rated TV show of all time. It's totally true. And he said to me, I think we can do that with food, but you're going to have to make it work. And so by day, I went out to sell cable affiliates on a funny project called the Television Food Network, and I flew back at night to do the 9 p.m. primetime show. Those were long days and long hours. And I love to remember that we were all amateurs in this world of food television. We set the kitchen set on fire one night with Bobby Flay. I hit Mickey Gilley in the face with a frying pan one night when we were throwing things up on the grill. And out of the Food Network is how we wound up trying to build a satellite studio here in Las Vegas and bring out celebrity chefs who could make their restaurants here. Many of them have come. And while I was here, I began to fall in love with Las Vegas and decided to stay. And now you know, if you follow what we do, we have Vegas Deluxe with over 2 million hits a month. We're on AOL that led to YouTube and a funny company called Hoopla Ha Network. And it's been great out of all of that to be able to contribute to Keep Memory Alive, Opportunity Village, and even Myron's Smith Center. I haven't given up on a dream that I've always had of producing a daily or a weekly network show from Las Vegas, but we will be honest, television today just isn't what it was in its heyday. The message from all of this, and you've heard some of this tonight, is that people's lives that change and can change other lives can only happen in America. What happened to me would never have happened in Britain. So I say to you, have a passion for your career, and it never becomes work. Don't know what her career is, but... 1,800. Anyway. So the message about what you do for a living is to eat it, drink it, live it, follow it to the fullest. So to all of you, thank you for coming, and may all of your champagne wishes and caviar dreams come true.